On this installment of What They Don't Want You to Know About Money, we're going to be talking about investing in your different life stages. Now, understanding how money works as you are at different stages in your life. Now, most people start working in their 20s. And in your 20s, you're basically earning your first income and you're basically starting to understand how money works. If you've been fortunate enough to go through financial education, you've already got an advantage. But in your 20s, you really need to start laying the grounds, the seeds for your success in terms of wealth creation. And in your 20s, what I would recommend you need to do is start saving. Start saving aggressively and start saving handsomely. What do I mean? I mean, start saving up to 25% of what you earn. In your 20s, it's very easy to save such a large proportion of your income because you haven't yet built a lot of expenses. And once you make it part of your character as a habit of saving, it will allow you to compound your savings in the future. Why am I saying it's important to save the most in the 20s? It's simply because of the principle of the time value of money. Money which is allowed to grow for a longer period starts to give you compound interest. And normally if you look at the rule of 72, which is the number of years it takes for your money to start to double when you've invested it, you need to start as early as possible. So for example, if you start investing in your 20s in an investment at 10%, which means that by the time you're 40, you're now in a situation where the money you've been saving since your 20s is doubling in value every year. So you need to give it time. So in your 20s, definitely, I would recommend save a lot. Second thing in your 20s, which I would recommend is when you are looking for that life partner or spouse, do it wisely. There are differing views in terms of who's best for you, but try and find a financially compatible partner who understands your life journey and goals and set these goals together. And also importantly in your 20s, get on board that financial planning professional who's going to take you through your life. It's important because if you have sound advice at a young age, which I wish I had, you can actually make very, very difficult decisions easily because you simply listen. And that's important. In your 20s, get used to listening. Because when you hire a professional, you hire them because they know more than you do. And you hire them to add value. Don't argue. Do what you're advised to do. By the time you get into your 30s, things often start to get tricky. Because sometimes you've now got a child or two, or you've been in a long-term relationship or have had failed relationships. And if you haven't started saving, the pressure is now on. Because remember, on that rule of 72 of investing at 10%, in your 30s, you need to basically reassess if you haven't started saving, and you will need to save an even greater proportion of your income. And it's going to be difficult because you've now created expenses, you've now created expectations, you've now created a whole lot of situations which take your money away. Some people may call it for family responsibility, or colloquially they try and call it black tax. But essentially, if you're now facing that in your 30s, it's often because in your 20s you didn't create those boundaries to limit how much exposure you have in terms of money that's going out of your financial economy, or rather your personal economy. So in your 30s, it's really an emergency. It's the last chance you have to actually be in a situation where you can still relatively work with the numbers and create wealth. By the time you enter into your 40s, big decisions need to be made because it's a time when you've almost missed the boat. In your 40s, you need to actually now have saved up the equivalent of your annual income. So if you are employed or you have a business, by the time you're 35, the rule of thumb is you should have saved up your annual income. So if you have an annual income of 500,000 a year when you're aged 40, you should have saved 500,000 somewhere, which would have been quite possible if you had started in your 20s or in your 30s. Also, it's important in your 40s to make sure that you've already got life cover in place, because suddenly in your 40s, you start looking at your health. And your health is essentially your wealth, because time is the currency of real wealth. And you want to live a comfortable life in good health. So in your 40s, make sure you invest in your health in terms of being in good shape and getting your body back if you've lost it in your 20s and your 30s. Make sure you're saving aggressively, and make sure that you are in that situation where you can actually do one last thing in terms of creating additional income. When you enter your 50s, it's a time at which you actually should be consolidating. If you had taken advice in your 20s based on my savings chart or my recommended spending chart, which you have on your screen right now, if you had started in your 20s, when you're in your 50s, life is good. You're now in a situation where you have passive income, and you probably are in a situation where you've started creating enough income to start seeing light in terms of reaching your poverty escape velocity number. Remember, that's a number I try and say calculate in your 20s and 30s and work towards it as a goal. It's also important to note that by the time you reach your 50s, often you've also got children who are now leaving the nest. And yes, children is an important decision. In terms of my wealth experience, I'll definitely say if you want to have children, have them in your 20s. Because if you have your children in your 20s, by the time you're in your 50s, they're going to university, they are leaving the home. And at that same time, you're in a situation where if you've been saving prudently, you're creating passive income, which means that you can support whatever little dreams they have. But remember, part of your planning in your 20s and 30s is also investing for children. Yes, children, instead of birthday presents, take investments in terms of cash, invest that cash and allow that money to start compounding, which means that, remember, imagine if your child is born and you start investing from that day, by the time they're 21, you have investments which literally are doubling every year. By the time you reach your 60s, it's really a time when you should be slowing down and enjoying your wealth. It's a time in which you should be looking forward to taking grandchildren to school. Because you've got passive income, you are supposed to be helping out maybe even your children pay school fees. Because remember, even if you take it from a biblical sense, it's a time when you're looking after your children's children. And the Bible says you shall create an inheritance for your children's children, which is why you find grandparents in most of the established wealth circles and segments. Grandparents look after the grandchildren because it is a money rule. You create wealth for 2 generations down. So by your 60s, that's the life you should be looking forward to. If you haven't saved, if you haven't invested, and if you knew no better, and you're watching this and you're in your 60s, it's a really challenging time because you might end up having to sell your primary asset, which is your home, which by the time you're in your 60s, if you decided to be a money slave and work for 20 or 30 years towards a bond, you're paying it off. You end up selling the exact same asset which you just finished paying off in your 60s, just so that you can survive through retirement. 70s and beyond are retirement years. These are years in which you should be enjoying income, money which you put in and allowed to vest and is now returning back to you. So it's important for you to look at some of these numbers. I've got a number of chapters which talk to investing in your 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s in my book, which is called My Money, which you can get online. I'll put something on the screen right now so that you know where you can find the book. Buy the book and read those chapters. And remember, investing in yourself is part of creating that wealth. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for subscribing to my YouTube channel, and continue to share this channel with whoever you know so that they too can know what they don't want you to know about money.